G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares. Just let me get off the thumbnail because it actually has the solution. Didn't realize that, and that's where we're headed. So if you remember my last video, I did a very interesting knight and pawn endgame where sort of established a force wall, and wherever the king moved, there'd be a way for the defending knight to fight against the king and his pawns. Okay, so that was originally from a blog which had a study from 100 endgames you must know, but of course those 100 endgames you must know came from other books, and I was using the Cast and Muller Frank Lamprecht book to go through that position. And now I've moved on to, it's quite funny, you can see it right there, that's the page which had the previous study with that little 4 stars in a corner sort of shape. And on the very next column, you have a much more fascinating area, force wall. It's a whole C file, as you can see.
Then put up the force wall.
Confirmed.
From 1938, from Vitaly Chekhover. And I thought this is great because actually it's almost like corresponding squares. It's like corresponding roads, I guess, is a way of interpreting it. And there's another composer who we can have a bit of a quick look at, and then we can solve the problem. So sort of that's sort of how you got good chess books. There's always packed with material. Interesting though, I didn't find any highlighted bits in this chapter, so I think I might have skipped this chapter when I was looking at it many years ago, because knight endgames, people say they're like pawn endgames, hence corresponding squares, but on the other hand, they're very, very tricky. Okay, so let's just shut that down, and we'll quickly have a look at Vitaly Chekhover. Here's his Wikipedia page, quite a short one. I think the most interesting thing about it is he's obviously known as a composer rather than a player, although he did have the International Master title. There's another problem. We're going to have a quick look at that just to sort of warm up, basically. And I think he's probably most famous for is his compositions. And you have a look at this section here. He co-wrote the Comprehensive Chess Endings book, because that was a 5-book series, I believe, and Haverback kind of supervised it and did a lot of material, and then he had different specialist authors. So in the Knight Endings section, Vitaly Chekhover was the sort of assistant writer, let's say, and a lot of his positions are from that book. And then I think it was Mizalis was the sort of the second in command on the pawn endgame book, so he gave it a sense. So obviously he's pretty well known in the composition world. And then we just quickly go across to Arves, and you've got a picture. Let's see any picture I could find of him. That's one I used on my thumbnail. And once again, a few compositions. I say he's simply well known for using knights and queens as well, rather than pawn endgames. But as we go through this, we'll see how we're able to use knight endgames in a corresponding squares type of concept. So, I mean, this bit is just sort of the normal bit I do in terms of I just wanted to understand a bit more about the composers and the history behind it all. So we can just quickly minimize that, and I will run this map where the composers come from, and check over. You can see he's St. Petersburg, Halberstadt, Keres, Grigoriev, so we can see sort of the Russian influence. If we close that and actually quickly look at the other thing I wanted to do, this puts them in the timeline, and a bit big now, but you can see there's the years that they're relevant for, and you can see that from Central Europe now, quite a focus of a lot of these famous composers are coming from the Russian or Soviet sphere of influence. So these Haverback, Chekhover fits into that. Keres as well, right? Technically from different countries, the way I've been doing this chart, but anyway, that's sort of the background to where he fits in space and time. And then now we're going to go and have a look at these studies. Now, the first thing, I'm just going to do the warm-up one, just to get a bit of a sense for we're going to be looking at how the barriers which knights establish really has a close relationship to corresponding squares. And this is that position we saw on the Wikipedia page. This one's quite straightforward, but it just helps you understand, right? So we've got to stop this pawn, right? If we don't do anything, king can run across, the knight will have to sacrifice for a pawn, and then there are lots of other pawns, right? So maybe try and solve it yourself, but anyway. So the idea is you've got to check the pawn. Pawn's going to be taken, pawn has to move, check, and pick up the pawn. Now, just as you look at that process, you can see that you attacking the pawn from there, you'll be able to attack it again from there. Take the pawn from, let's say, c2, and the pawn moves, you'd be able to attack it again from d4. But if you attack the pawn from this square, c4, and the pawn moves on, you won't be able to attack it again for that 4 moves. So that's one pattern to think about, right? Check, got one pawn. And now, the logical thing, there's a few lines here, but let's have a look at the logical one. You move the king across. You can see you can see a barrier, right? So basically there's these 2 squares to think about. Let's try either of them. Okay, there's probably the main continuation, king c4. Now let's see what happens. We block one pawn, and you can see if you move to d4, we're going to check and pick up the other pawn. So the logical thing is move the pawn. Now we attack the g pawn, got to move. Attack the f pawn, it's got to move. Attack the f pawn, it's got to move again. Attack the g pawn, it's got to move again. And now we attack the g pawn. Well, actually, it's now either it doesn't move, and we take it, and then we're covering the queenie square, or it does move, and then now we've got a check, and we pick up the f pawn, and we're covering the queenie square. Right. So that was just, I think Chekhov actually had another study he did where he had this knight against the two pawns like that, and this is just highlighting that again. And if you have a look at it, if you look at this position here, remember we had these squares were blocked, and we could have chosen either of those two squares. C2 something else happens, but C4 you can see why it's the it's on the barrier, because it's this final move. Like this is move 10, like 7 moves later, that check picks up the pawn. What we're going to do now is have a look at main study. Let's move up to it. Okay, so I've taken away all the colouring on position. Let's have a quick look at the understanding position. There are these 2 pawns on the A file. I believe they're there basically to make sure that the white king is way out of play, particularly the pawn on A6 that keeps the white king out of play. So the knight has to fight against the 2 pawns on the king side on its own. And the basic of the way to draw is you need to compose some series of moves where you pick up one of the pawns and then you can defend against the other pawn, particularly as long as the H pawn hasn't advanced too far. So that's the basis. White king's out of play, knight has to defend on its own. If you look at the top right chart there, according to, actually you can also colour in C5 as well, the barrier, and basically something goes wrong, whichever of those squares black moves to. Therefore, as soon as black tries to move across to the king side, then he hits one of those mine squares, and there's a sequence of moves where it is a draw. And if he doesn't do that, well, then white just hovers between A1 and B1, and nothing's going to happen. So what we're going to do now is let me bring up my simulator, which will demonstrate in clearer terms exactly what's going on with this. Right, I did some enhancements to my simulator. It took me a little bit of time, and I'm probably not going to be used for anything else ever again, but I just wanted to try and understand a bit more clearly. So let me pick it up. Okay, we've seen this before. Let me just get rid of that, and then I'll do result. Right. So first thing to note is that there's a draw if the knight's on any of those squares in this particular position with black to move, which is the position we're talking about. You can see that if the knight is on G8 or G4, one of the pawns will drop straight away. And if you're on E7, you're threatening to check and grab a pawn. And if you don't do that, and if you stop that by moving the king, then we would go to G8 and fork the pawns and pick off one of them. And the same thing on E3, we're threatening to check on D5, and therefore you can't move the F pawn, so you move the king, and then we go to G4 and fork. So they're all trivial. The 2 non-trivial solutions here is the one which Chekhover gives, which is G3, and also the other one, which is G7. We'll have a quick look at that at the end. Why is it a draw? Right? Okay, so this is where we get these little sequences, and this is where I've tried to sort of build up on versions to build a barrier. First thing we're going to do is sort of layer 1. Right? So this is where if black moves to C3 or C5, then it's simple. White plays knight to E4, check, he's checking it, and then we'll pick up the pawn. The red arrow shows the threat. Okay, so that's the part of the barrier that's been set up.
Then put up the force wall.
Confirmed.
Turn that off. Have a look at 2 moves. Okay, so we go to E4, attack the pawn. Pawn must move. Pawn moves to F5, and then we play knight to D6, check. If the king is on any of those squares, I've highlighted C8, B5, or C4. So that's those squares covered. So you can see what happens is that you force the pawn on, and then now you've got a check from a different square. And if we look at the combination of 1 and 2, you can see we're building up a nice little barrier. Let's continue. Third layer is, it's a bit convoluted. There's a couple of ways of doing it, but you can see what you got to do. You got to go, let me fix that over there. We'll do the arrows. So knight, there's the southern route, let's say. Knight goes to E4, attacks pawn. Pawn goes to F5. Knight comes back, forces the pawn on to F4. And now that the pawn is on F4, knight to E2, check. If it had moved to the C1 or C3 square, picks up the pawn. Now, if you look at the other route, h5, pawn's got to advance to f5, goes to g7, pawn's got to advance to f5. Now we have this other access square, e6. It's checked if you're on c7 or c5. So that's those 4 squares covered. So let's have a look at that. One combination. Still some squares missing. How are we going to get those? Let's have a think about it. It looks like those 2 squares, in fact, if you include b3 as well, it's not like critical. You see that the key square for a knight jump is going to be... There's 2 ways of getting there, but the end game's the same. Let's go... Knight goes to h5, pawn's got to move to f5. Knight goes to g7, pawn has got to go to f4. Knight goes to e6, pawn has got to move on to f3, and then now knight to d4, check. Black king, those 4 squares, will pick up the pawn. Actually, I think about it. Logically, there'd be one more. My code is this horrible bloody recursive loop, so let's not go into that. But there might have been a way of picking up the pawn on f2 with the black king in certain situations. But that's 3 levels depth, 2 levels depth. Now, what you'll notice there is actually the one you don't actually need the level because you've got all the squares covered. So that is indeed the force wall. So I hope that's clear. I've just I said let's turn them all off again. I spent a lot of time on this. It's nice. Simple one, a check straight away, a move and then a check, 2 moves and then a check, 3 moves and then a check. Okay, good. So let me quit from that. Now we're going to have a look at it in scid. Yeah, I think this one will do. Now you can see what I've done there. I've marked out all these corresponding squares, which is exactly, we'll get back to this in a minute, but it's really these corresponding squares. What I'm saying is that if the black king gets to c5 or c3, you can see the corresponding square is just checking on e4 and then picking up. And then if it goes to squares, just c4, then back the pawn moves, check, picking up the pawn. Right? So let's go through some of these lines. Okay, there's all the possibilities. King to c3, or exactly what I said. There's a 2-move maneuver, check, and take the pawn. Okay. So that's 1. Let's go to a 2. First move, you can see. First move, take the pawn. Second move, check and pick up the pawn. See the process? Check, pick up the pawn. Take it back to start. 1 of 3. Let's say there's you can do these either 2 ways, but let us pick. I think this is the one I've coded up to. You can do 3 or 4 here. Let's do king to d7. It's a 3. Okay, let's have a look how this works. Take the pawn advances, take the pawn advances, check, pick up the pawn. And then the other one we're going to do is c6. So let's do that same maneuver. Here now, it is 5 moves. Okay, take the pawn advances, take the pawn advances, take the pawn advances, pawn check, and pick off the pawn. Right, so that's all of those coded up, all the different numbers of moves. So it's actually just completely covered. It's actually exactly what we see it is. These are the corresponding squares. This is the corresponding route. If you're there and there, you go there. If you're there, you go there and there. And if you're a 3, then depending upon which way you're going, like there, you have to go. Actually, this is where you have that repetition. You go there, you take the pawn, you come back, go there and there. And if it's 4, take the pawn, take the pawn, take the pawn, and then this is going to be final check with the pawn is now moved onto that square. Okay, now I found this very, very mind scrambling, these positions, but you can see how it works. This is an amazing composition. This is 1938, right? You don't have computers. Just you'd be moving the knight around the board, working out all these different things, and you can see this goes back to the base position is the whitest to pick off one of those pawns. How do we do it? So there's that, and you can see that sort of position with corresponding squares. You've got a 4 on d4 and a 2 and a 3. And a 3 down there. Now what I remember show you before, we'll bring up it's a different position. I did the second solution, as it were. Remember I said that this G7 square is basically it's a second solution to the problem, and I thought that's interesting. There's one. The one looks completely different. The 1 is coming, but remember what I said, the 1s are redundant, so actually you don't need 1. But 2, actually you end up on the same square, and you've got 3 where you end up on the same squares, and you've got 4 where you end up on the same squares. Right, and you've covered it all. The 1 is different, but as I said, that's not right. So basically, the solution is the same. You end up on the same key squares in the end. I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, the route's getting there. Kind of the reverse. When you step through, in a solution, when you step through G7, you'd probably be stepping through G3 instead, and vice versa. However, that's great. Got a second solution, so I'll quit from that, and then what we can do is let's move to, I think I coded that up. Yeah, so I did the corresponding squares, and you can see that you got this 1 and 1, whereas the other one had the 1 was, I think, there. But now you've got 2 and 3 and 4 and 3, and basically they're covering the same squares as that they were. It's interesting. There is two solutions to this problem, which I thought were quite interesting, and there was just that way of interpreting corresponding path rather than just the corresponding squares themselves. Now, these barriers in pawn endgames, obviously we can see from the screenshot there, very common in these types of positions, and there's quite a few other compositions by Chekhover and others where a barrier or a fourth wall is completely relevant to the solution. I might, if I can tweak my little code here, I might try and look at a few more of them to see how it sort of comes out, because I think the visualizing with the paths and the corresponding squares can actually help you to solve these problems if you run across them in a game, in terms of what's the right approach for attacking the pawns, and basically not giving up, because a lot of these positions you can still draw because the knight is a very tricksy piece. Great. Okay. I hope you found that interesting, and thank you very much for watching.